right, I think everyone's in. So I want to welcome everyone to Integrate Online, presented by West Virginia University Reed College of Media, which offers renowned online master's degree programs in marketing communications. Thank you for joining us. I am David Hazelton, and today we'll be discussing branding in context with Veronica Purvis, Associate Executive Director of the Skin of Color Society, and Neal Stewart, VP of Sales and Marketing at Deschutes Brewery. Please be sure to keep your mics muted for the session, and you can send questions in the chat feature. We'll try to get to as many of those as we can. I want to introduce our guests. I'm very happy to have both of them here today. Veronica, I have worked with on some DEI issues here in the Washington, D.C. area. Can you tell us about yourself and what you're doing, Veronica?
Sure. I am an association executive. Like you said, I currently work at the Skin of Color Society, which is a nonprofit member organization that serves board certified dermatologists that focus on pigmented skin and how conditions present in skin of color, how to treat and prevent those conditions. I have been working in the association world for over 20 years now. My background is in branding, marketing, communications. I've run full service marketing departments and communication functions. I'm a certified association executive. I have my master's in management and marketing. I'm also an entrepreneur who helps entrepreneurs themselves with branding their businesses and personally branding themselves. So I'm so happy to be here.
Great, thanks, Veronica. And our other guest today is Neal Stewart. I met Neal at an Integrate session, an actual in-person Integrate session when we were able to do those in Morgantown. Neal, can you tell us about yourself and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. I miss those days of getting together in person. Hopefully we can do that again soon. Yeah, my name is Neal Stewart. I'm coming to you from out here in Bend, Oregon, where I am the VP of Sales and Marketing for Deschutes Brewery. So I've been in the beer business for about 20 years now. Got my start, like I said, about 20 years ago with Pabst Brewing Company. I come from a marketing background, although I do spend most of my time these days kind of working on more sales initiatives. But in consumer packaged goods, sales is a little bit of a misnomer. I call it brand management on steroids. So a lot of what I work on is our portfolio strategies, pricing strategies, marketing strategies, building relationships with key customers like big grocery store chains like Safeway, Kroger, Albertsons, whatever it might be. Yeah, very happy to be associated with the WVU program again. I did graduate from the program just a couple of years ago, so always happy to be involved in these sessions.
Great, well, we're happy to have you here. I want to start off as we start the conversation about branding in context. And Veronica, I want to start with you and really ask you, what are the components of a strong brand? What do you think is the most important, and what really builds a strong brand for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I know that we use brand and organization interchangeably, so I will be toggling back and forth between those terms, but I do think that the brand is a strategic function of an organization, and there are some of those conventional components of a brand that we think of, such as the message, the personality, the tone that an organization uses to describe itself, the personality that the organization takes on, and the visual expression of those elements, right? So the things that we see that signifies the brand's personality, like the logo and the color family that's used, the different design elements. And so those are some of those, I think, conventional aspects of a brand that we think of. But I think one of the most important things of a brand is the unique value proposition, right? And that's not always so tangible or visible, but that is the core component of a brand. And if you think about the unique value proposition, it's unique, it's value, it's proposition. So what do those mean? Unique, what's novel to your organization? You know, what makes your organization special? I think the value needs to be that the benefits basically out the perceived cost. So that's bottom line what the value ends up being to your customers, your constituents. And the proposition is, what is that promise? What does that promise look like that your organization is offering to your constituents? And the important thing about the unique value proposition, or the UVP, is that it really needs to be consistent and it needs to be authentic. And so I think if an organization can capture that, then that is really what's going to make your organization stand out as a brand. And there are a number of ways that an organization can communicate its UVP. I mean, I think first you have to establish that, and it can be in different formats, but typically you see the UVP in the who we are, who do we serve, and how do we serve our audience. So that's one example of how that can be formatted. But I do think that a consistent and an authentic unique value proposition is the main component of a brand.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love that you mentioned the brand promise, because I think that promise is really sort of the essence of the brand. I live in the design world, so I'm very involved with the color palette and the logo and those like visual aspects that you talked about. But really the promise and the UVP are very important, I think. Neal, do you agree with that, or do you have any comments on that that you'd like to share?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was a great description. What it reminded me of is, and I'll probably do this several times today and steal a bunch of good quotes from other people, but what I heard someone say about a brand one time is, if you can clearly picture a brand living in a different category, then that's the definition of a great brand. So for example, I'll use the brand that I work on, Deschutes Brewery. If you can clearly picture what the Deschutes Brewery amusement park would look like, you know, what would be the attractions, what would be the shows, what would be the rides, what would be the theme of that amusement park, then that's when you really have a strong, well-differentiated brand with a voice that is kind of unmistakable. Another category you could use is, you know, what if a brewery was part of what if it had opened a hotel? What would that experience at a hotel look like? So I think that's always a good kind of filter to ask yourself, if you've got your brand as differentiated and defined as it should be.
I think that's great. I love any amusement park analogy to start with, so that was really good. Talking about brands going into different areas, Neal, can you tell me a little bit about how brands might jump from niche markets to mainstream? I know you do a lot of consumer packaged goods and probably have some experience with that.
Yeah. I mean, as we were getting prepared for this conversation, that was the thing that really came to mind for me. You know, context, honestly, is a word that I use at work quite often, because I think context is everything. You know, as Veronica was saying, you know, she kind of is using brand and organization interchangeably because there are different audiences that you're talking to. I spend a lot of time thinking about the context in how we represent all of our marketing efforts, whether that is a group of internal stakeholders, whether those are specific customers that we sell our product to, or whether those are consumers that are like actually drinking the product, or even shoppers. Shoppers are different than consumers. So the context in your messaging is really important. So, you know, today, you know, we see so many, you know, kind of niche brands popping up. I mean, we really are living, I think, in the golden age of brands, you know, launching and rising to, you know, stardom very quickly. And I think a lot of this is really triggered by the macro consumer trend of wellness. There are so many brands out there that are really changing the rules of what had been kind of the mainstream play by the large macro companies. But you see brands like, you know, cauliflower pizza, you know, cauliflower pizza crust in the frozen foods now. So how are they going from something that might be very intimidating for the mainstream consumer? They're building it with a niche audience, but then they're finding a way to expand. Something that we talk about in consumer packaged goods a lot is, you know, what is the size of the prize? So when you're only marketing to a niche audience, the size of the prize is fairly small. If you're only talking to people who are vegans, for example, there, I don't know what the percentage of vegan consumers are out there, but let's say it's, less than 10%. Well, then your ability to build your business can only go so far. So how can you find kind of that next step? What lever can you pull for that brand to go from being only attractive to a niche audience to being mainstream? I'll reference something that I've heard over the course of my career. Someone used to tell me about the punk rock movement of the 1970s. And back in the 1970s, punk rockers would put safety pins through their ears. That's how they would pierce their ears. All right. They would just put the pin right through there and they were done with it. As punk rock became more and more mainstream, the people who were not really comfortable putting safety pins through their ears, they started putting safety pins in their jean jackets. So you guys probably remember that from the time. That was a way that a more mainstream audience was able to participate in that culture by still kind of paying homage to the way that it started.
That's great. I'm wondering a little bit, does that go the other way too? I just read that Ocean Spray, the king of cranberry juice, is coming up with an energy drink. Like they're putting caffeine into one of their products. So is that a big brand going to a niche market then? And is that easier to do or is that more difficult?
Yeah, it's not surprising. I mean, Ocean Spray is actually getting very innovative with their approach now. They've realized again that, they're a huge cranberry juice company, but they probably hit a little bit of a brick wall. And then they're also trying to appeal to a younger consumer base that are looking for different functional benefits from their beverages. So yeah, I think what they're doing is they're going out there and kind of finding what we call the white space. What is underdeveloped, but has a bigger consumer desire or need, and they're trying to capitalize on that. Yeah, they'll probably start with fairly niche marketing, but then of course they have the Ocean Spray name to support it that would make it appealing to that larger mainstream audience. And so for those people that kind of see themselves more on the bleeding edge of trends, they may not be familiar with caffeine. I think, what is it? I think it's called cascara, the coffee beans, when they use the skin of coffee beans and
Right.
they pull the caffeine out of it. So they might not know exactly what that means, but the Ocean Spray name gives them enough confidence to give it a shot. And what's really powerful about that is when you really hit upon that kind of, like Veronica said, that unique selling proposition, it makes it very buzzworthy. It makes it something that people want to tell their friends about. And obviously, word of mouth marketing can be much more effective and less expensive than traditional mainstream advertising.
Thanks, Neal. As we talk about word of mouth and conversations and things like that, Veronica, I want to turn to you and ask, how do brands begin having social conversations with honesty and authenticity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that transparency is the beginning of that and is the key to that, right? So, and if you don't have some things established at the very beginning, it's kind of hard to have anything to stand on and really begin these conversations with. For example, in the past, I think that organizations, companies talked about having values. They didn't always publicize those or share those, but you see some companies being more willing and more companies sharing what those values are, those core company values. One company that comes to mind is Ben & Jerry's. You all may have seen or heard that Ben & Jerry's, for a long time, they've made their core values a part of their brand. And I think more so than some other companies have for so long. So if you go to the Ben & Jerry's website, it's right there front and center. They have a tab there that says values. You click on that and they lay out how their values actually play into how they conduct their business. Everything from how they source their ingredients to how they hire, how they train, and how they serve their customers. And I can put it in the chat, but it's very interesting how they weave this into their story, into their brand story. And so I think more and more companies are going to have to really take a hard look at what are they valuing? what are their core values? And if they don't have them, they should think about those and establish some, because then it gives you something to stand on too when you're having these conversations and you're engaging with your audiences and your larger community. I've seen, well, I think one way to do this and to actually engage in some of these conversations about it is to ask your community, how do they think your company is actually living up to the values that you've committed to? Companies do surveys all the time. They ask for feedback. And I don't think I've seen companies really asking about that aspect of their organization. And so I think that's one way to do it, is to ask, to incorporate it into your conversations that you're already having with your customers. Let them know these are our values. These are the things that we stand on and the ways that we would like to serve you. How are we doing in that realm? I'll give you an example of how values can actually play into the daily service of customers. I was at a sandwich shop this past weekend with my daughter, and we were just going in and grabbing something. And I heard a conversation by one of the customers. He went up to the counter and he asked them if he could have some pickles on the side of his sandwich. And he then asked them, do you all usually provide pickles with the sandwiches? And the server said, yes, we do. But then the server went into this explanation of why they didn't do it. And he said something like, we didn't have them prepped at the time, and then we got busy, and something else. And basically he was making excuses of why he didn't put pickles on this guy's sandwich. Well, if you have, let's say, honesty as one of your core values, or accountability as one of your core values, then that needs to be expressed and explained and trained to the employees. Because in that situation, what the employee probably should have said was, I'm sorry, we didn't have them ready at the time. We should have told you so that you could have decided if you wanted to wait or you wanted your sandwich without the pickles. But now we have them and here you go. That kind of thing. It's a simple thing. It's a silly thing. But I heard that customer go back to his table and complain and tell his party what happened. And those kind of things resonate with people. And it just makes you say as a customer, why? You don't want to hear the excuses. You just want your sandwich right. So it's a silly kind of everyday thing, but it's just an example of how you can actually live, your company's core values, like how you can train and teach your employees to demonstrate those core values in their work every day.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I love the Ben & Jerry's example as well, because that's a company whose values are so woven into their brand that it's just a natural part. And you don't question the authenticity because it's in every aspect of what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Something just occurred this week. We saw Hasbro, the toy company, announce that they were going to take Mr. out of Mr. Potato Head. Mm. And they're
Oh, looks like David froze for a second.
He froze.
He should be back in a few seconds, hopefully. Neal, did you have any thoughts about that while he's frozen?
Yeah, I'll jump in there while we wait for him to return. Yeah, so Mr. Potato Head, Hasbro's removing the gender from it. I think we lost him completely. I guess we'll be back. Yeah, I mean, those are tough decisions that brands are making right now. I mean, this has been going on for close to a year, I think, where brands have started to really dissect themselves and understand how they appeal to all different consumer groups, rather than just your mainstream consumer group of years ago. How does your brand resonate with a diverse group of consumers? I think the situation there is one that these tend to be stories that last a little while. There are people on the fringes that have strong opinions one way or another, but the likelihood is that 6 months from now, Mr. Potato Head will not be a story, and it will their decision that Hasbro as a company made is going to appeal to a wider number of people. It's more DEI oriented, which is the right long-term decision for them. We've seen other brands like Uncle Ben's and Aunt Jemima make similar moves that are no longer in the news, and I think they will hopefully reap the benefits for making the right decision over the long term.
Hmm. Right. They weren't in the news until Aunt Jemima actually announced their new company name.
Right.
Right. Then it returned to the news because it was a law where you didn't hear what the new company name was going to be for a while. And then they finally announced it. And then you heard people's take on the new name, whether or not they liked it.
Yeah.
I think it starts internally, though, right? Those conversations have to start internally within the organization. And it's not just what you're publicizing for the public to see, but also what conversations are you having internally with your leadership, with your boards, with your employees? Because we don't want to be hypocrites where we're publishing or publicizing one facade, but then internally we're running our operations differently.
Yeah.
So I think that it always starts internally and needs to work its way out.
Yeah, like you said a minute ago, it goes back to the values of the company. I'm reminded of the ad campaign that Nike did probably about 2 years ago that I think people will probably look back and say was even a little bit ahead of its time with Colin Kaepernick, where they said, Colin Kaepernick really captures the essence of the Nike brand. He represents our values as a company. Did they go into that knowing that there would be people on the fringes of maybe the other side of the point of view? Yeah. Were there people that threatened that they would boycott Nike? Yeah. But they made the decision to stay true to their values, which probably earned them, even more credibility and trust with their core consumers who are buying more shoes and athletic gear.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. I'm not sure what happened, but I'm glad you all are having your conversation without me. And it sounds like you're right on target talking about authenticity in those brand conversations. Yeah, and it sounds like the examples you're giving are parallel with what I was talking about before I left abruptly with Hasbro and the Mr. Potato Head, where they've taken Mr. Potato out, but then later in the same day they retweeted that they were going to take Mr. out of the overall arching brand name, but they would still keep Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head as individual products. So they sort of walked it back a little bit after they came out with the statement, which seemed a little disingenuous, or maybe they weren't as authentic as they thought they were being with that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you hear about Burger King? I think it was Burger King yesterday during Women's History Month.
Yes.
And the tweet that they had put out that it didn't land the way that they thought it would land. And so I don't know what kind of conversations or focus groups, if any, they did beforehand to maybe test that concept. But it was supposed to be a joke that didn't resonate as funny with everyone.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand how they did want that to land. I haven't figured that one out yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a tough one to figure out, and I agree with Veronica. Like, there had to have been some testing. There had to have been some focus groups or something that went, and somebody said, okay, this is fine, but it did not land well. I agree.
No.
Veronica, this brings me up to, like, we're sort of talking about these social conversations. What social conversations are you currently having regarding branding and marketing and events and social issues, things like that? Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot, right, that's transpired just in the last year. And I mean, because I think some of these conversations have been occurring for years. I mean, diversity, equity, and inclusion, we've been talking about this for years at different organizations I've been at. And coincidentally, I've actually been at 3 organizations as a full-time employee during this pandemic and quarantine, which is funny because I was at one organization for 11 years. and then happened to be at 3 within a year. So we were having these conversations at all 3 organizations. And then with the different, police incidents, the police brutality, the different racial injustices that were occurring that brought a new focused attention to racial and social justice, just infused an insurgence into the interest around these issues last year. And so although we were already talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, we really ramped up our focus in those areas, and training bumped up with the employees, speakers on the topic. We source those to speak at our annual meetings. I'm also talking about this at the associations that I'm a member of. I'm chair of a branding subcommittee with the American Society of Association Executives, ASAE. And that's one of the things that we're talking about as well. And like you said, David, we've been on the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee with the American Marketing Association's DC chapter. And that's a newly formed committee focused around, talking about what are the issues and how can we take action to make a difference in the marketing community and in the surrounding area that we serve in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so we're, like I said, it's a new committee. So we've been talking about our mission, our goals for the year. We launched a website. We have our pledge there and some things that we're working on, and I can put that in the chat as well. But one of the actionable things that we're doing is that we're starting to hold these forums, these open forums, where we can have conversations like these and talk about them in an honest, authentic kind of way. So DEI certainly is one of the things that we're talking about at the Skin of Color Society, where I work as Associate Executive Director. Of course, that's something that we're very concerned with because, as you all may know, the population, of course, is changing in the US. It has been for a long time. And there's more people with pigmented skin. And that means more people that are afflicted with different hair, skin, nails issues that the dermatologists are concerned with, as well as the health disparities, the lack of research and resources that are available and that involve people of color. So this is an important issue that we're talking about at Skin of Color Society, or SOX, all the time, and how can we improve the health equity. So we're talking about that. We're talking about, of course, the pandemic and how that is causing all of us to have to pivot our business models, to rethink our business models, to be able to thrive in a more disparate and digital world. So I remember the main thing that people were scrambling with at the beginning or second to third quarter of 2020 was the meetings, right? The events.
Yes.
And how can we reimagine these into a completely digital space? I think as marketers and branders, to me, this wasn't anything new. I mean, I've been going to online learning and virtual events for at least a decade, if not longer, webinars and things like that. But for a whole industry to have to pivot and figure out how to produce an event completely in a virtual space, because it's different when you're having a webinar from a whole 5-day meeting, right? So that was the big thing, and people were scrambling. It was a panic, and even now we're still talking about that, but I think now you're hearing organizations talk more about the hybrid model and what are things going to look like in the new normal, whatever that means. And so those are some of the things that we're talking about. How can we reformulate our events into a hybrid model around, health concerns and things like that? And how can we address DEI issues? So those are still the main 2 things that we're talking about in my circles.
That's great. And Neal, I want to bring you in as we're talking about the pandemic year. How do you see brands evolving their strategy and tactics during the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine a bigger shift happening in such a small period of time. I mean, it ranges from the conversations that we have with consumers to how much we're spending on different tactics to what channels of trade we're focusing on. In consumer packaged goods, I mean, it's had a significant impact on supply chain. So cardboard is really hard to come by right now because so many consumers have gone away from dining out and now they're cooking at home, which puts more pressure on raw materials such as cardboard to put product into. But I wanted to kind of circle back to the other part of it. So there's the pandemic that we've been experiencing for the last 12 months, but then there's also been the social unrest that we've been challenged with over the last 12 months. And, I think the thing that we've talked about as an organization quite a bit is making a firm step in a direction of whatever we are choosing to communicate to both internal and external audiences, but then understanding the implications of that step that we make. So understanding that whatever you choose to communicate, you're not going to be able to make 100% of your stakeholders or your consumers happy. So in the case of Deschutes Brewery, when the social unrest was really at its peak during the summer, as a company, we made the choice to say Black Lives Matter, and we knew that we would get negative feedback from some consumers on our social media channels. So it was more than just making that one step to say, okay, we're going to say that, but it was making really 5 steps to understand how we would react to both positive and negative feedback from consumers. Because I think a big part of authenticity here is having confidence in what you say. Like you with the Mr. Potato Head example, which I'm actually not that familiar with, but reeling it back is where the authenticity crumbles. I'm sure that Hasbro, kind of war gamed this out and hopefully prepared themselves for a variety of different responses. But I think that in this day and age, you really have to be thinking like a chess player. You have to be strategic. You have to know what that reaction is going to be, and then what is your response going to be to various different types of communication. Because the messaging it happens way faster now. It happens even faster than it was 12 months ago, and social media was here then. But things are just everything's in a microwave right now. It happens in 30 seconds.
Can I add something to that, David?
Please.
So I think what Neal said there was important in terms of one part of that he said was being really confident, right, in what you're going to say. And I think that needs to really be reiterated because in one of my circles, when I said I was chair of the branding committee with ASAE, we just held a webinar on calibrating or recalibrating your brand positioning. And the reason why we thought that was important is because organizations really need to be strong and confident in what their brand positions are, so that when things happen, when different social issues happen, different emergencies happen, crises happen, you already know your position. You're not trying to scramble to figure out how to respond to all of these different things, because you have a general strong brand with a strong positioning, a strong UVP or a strong USP that you can stand on. And you already know what kind of ways you need to respond or not respond. One thing I was just talking to Socks about where I work now is having a statement that we have published on our website that stays there, that we can point media to when they're asking us, well, how do you feel about this issue that just came up? Are you going to respond to this or that? And I propose that we have a statement there that says, this is how we feel about social justice. This is how we feel about violence against people because of their race. This is how, this like a general kind of statement that covers a lot and says that we do take things case by case, but we may not respond to every single thing that comes up in the media. But I think you have to really do the work, the strategic work of actually stating and explaining, verbalizing basically what your organization, your company means and what it stands for, and having that strong brand position to begin with.
Yeah, I'll add to that real quick and just say that I think a mistake that I've made in my career is relying on kind of the more academic constructs of brand identity and believing that that was enough to sell it to internal stakeholders and getting them to believe in it. You know, we've been talking about context and how really every touch point matters because it does. So, you know, whether you use a brand prism or a brand pyramid or brand identity model, you know, whatever it is that little shape that you have on a piece of paper that explains your brand. What I've found is that that typically just doesn't resonate with people outside of your marketing department. To marketers, yeah, it makes a ton of sense to us. You know, it's concise, you know, it's what holds us honest to our brand and make sure that we can put whatever touch point through that lens to stress test it. But more and more, it's so important to find a way to sell that to all of your stakeholders, whether maybe it's a video that you need to produce, or maybe it's a series of impactful photos that kind of reference different like pop culture references that kind of drive home the message. But yeah, the brand prism and the brand pyramid, if you're trying to sell that to someone in accounting, it's probably not going to work.
I like that. I like that. And I keep going back to your amusement park analogy because I think that's really a better way to sell the brand than the pyramid.
Yeah, might be.
Great. Neal, while you're on the topic of brand authenticity, I know you did so much work with Pabst Blue Ribbon. Can you talk a little bit about that brand and how that authenticity is sort of built into that brand?
Yeah, well, I mean, my work on that brand is a classic example of don't mess it up. So for those of you that are not intimately familiar with the Pabst Blue Ribbon brand, I'll rewind to the late 70s. PBR was one of like the top 5 brands in the country. It was selling about I think 23 million barrels of beer. So a barrel is like 2 kegs or about 13 cases of beer. So it was selling a ton of beer. And over the next 23 years, it steadily declined and it bottomed out at about, call it 900,000 barrels. And, you know, it was kind of left for dead. You know, it was really just a brand that was being consumed by an older demographic that was buying it purely based on price. There wasn't any kind of emotional benefit to it. It was just something that fit their economy. So what happened was there was a group of consumers actually out here in the Pacific Northwest that kind of picked up the brand, made it their own, and they were what became kind of known as hipsters. But the reason that they loved the brand was because it didn't advertise. It wasn't over marketed to them. So I was the brand manager for that brand at that time. And that's where, you know, I kind of came in and understood that there was something happening that was purely owned by consumers. And, you know, if I were to acknowledge those consumers and start marketing to them, they would have turned off as quickly as they started to adopt the brand. So it was all about kind of finding unique ways into the subculture of those consumers and supporting them. And over time, you know, we knew that we had to kind of expand the consumer group. I often thought of it as concentric circles around those consumers. There were the niche consumers, and then there were consumers that maybe were friends with them, and then there was a larger group of consumers, and as it went further and further out, it became more and more mainstream. Well, the trick was to go further and further out to those circles because that represented a bigger volume and profit opportunity, but we couldn't offend the core. So there were different things that we did throughout, you know, my 6 years with the brand, and they did a great job of continuing it. And it was kind of like what I said earlier, you know, you got to have a little bit of a wink and a nod to the consumers that got you there, and you have to do things that they give you as the brand owner permission to do. And then when you have that permission, then you can start to market a little bit more widely. So the way that we did that was we started to support the actual subcultures that were really adopting the brand, whether that was, rockabilly musicians or artists or skateboarders, snowboarders. We supported their events. Once they figured out that we were doing that from a place of authenticity, they gave us permission to start doing things that were a little bit more mass marketing oriented. And I guess the end of the story is that, I mentioned the 23 million down to 900,000. Well, over the next, I guess from about 2002 to 2010, the brand went back up to 2 million barrels, which is actually pretty big these days in the grand scheme of things. So the brand ended up doubling its volume.
Yeah, I love that story. And I think it shows that no matter how much we try to control the brand lives in the mind and the hearts of the consumer. And they have as much, if not more, control over the brand, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, they really do. And I mean, and this was before the age of social media. I think that that's even more amplified these days, that ultimately, yeah, the consumer owns the brand, and understanding the permissions that they give you is really important. But then going back to that authenticity, being comfortable in your own skin is also important. Having the confidence that you are who you are. That's where the two kind of strengths meet: the brand strength and the consumer strength.
Yeah, I think so. Veronica, could you have a comment on that?
No, I was just thinking that that is so true. And David, you just now brought the other side of that up, which is, yeah, your brand sometimes is determined by your customers, your consumers. So it organically kind of develops that way too. So although we do try to control it sometimes, we want to be intentional about it from the top up. It also is brewing, pun intended, from the bottom up.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's very true. Well, we've talked a lot about the last year and all of the events of that year and how it has affected brands. I'm wondering, and I'll pose this to you, Veronica, looking forward, what are some ways a company can plan for the future?
Strategic foresight is something that we talk a lot about in the association space. As executive leaders, as on boards and things like that, we want to have that strategic foresight. But how do you have that? How do you gain that? And I think also as marketers and branders, we think of ourselves as futurist or trend followers. I know I've considered myself a trend follower for a long time. And so, I mean, because some of these things that have happened, the writing has been on the wall. Trends they don't just happen overnight, right? You see things going in a certain direction. And I think if you pay attention, you can see where the industry is going, especially at a macro level. A lot of us probably read different future reports. I know there's one that is coming out March 16th that the Future Institute is supposed to be publishing on annual tech trends. One I was just looking at the other day from the Future Laboratory. They've published 50 consumer trends for 2021, and I can put that link in the chat if anyone's interested. But that is pretty interesting because that one talks about, like I said, 50 different consumer categories and what different industries are looking at and what direction they may be going in. So for example, they talk about restaurants and how restaurants are embracing augmented reality and looking at AI to give customers a more immersive kind of experience, right, from afar. Like Neal had mentioned earlier, different companies and products venturing into the wellness space that may not have been there before. That's touched on in this report as well, and how more and more, all types of industries are looking at wellness, right? But there are some other ones there that you may not have thought of. And so that's interesting. So I would say looking at those different future reports, looking at trend reports, even if it's not necessarily innovations that you can tackle, you can take on within your organization, but being aware of what is happening in your industry and related industries, and maybe getting some inspiration. So in addition to looking at different reports and staying abreast of what's happening, also making sure that you have the business model and practices in place that keep you nimble, and being able to act on different things, when you need to, and putting in continuity programs or plans. I'm a firm believer in trying to plan as much as possible, even though you have to be able to adjust, at whatever notice. So, but I think without having some type of plan, and again, as marketers, as branders, we usually also thrive on having marketing communications and branding plans and policies and all those kind of things. And I think it comes in handy because you have some type of blueprint, right, that you can actually work from and adjust as you need to as you go along. So I think staying knowledgeable about what's happening in your industry, but as well as other industries, and keeping a kind of high level tap on what is happening globally. Being nimble, having that nimble kind of mindset, and putting business models in place that make it possible for you to be able to adjust, and having actual plans, putting things on paper, that you can refer to and adjust if you need to.
Yeah, I think nimble is a big word there. I'm glad you brought that up. Neal, do you agree with that? How do you think things are going to be in the future? Did we learn anything from the past year that we can apply?
I think Veronica absolutely nailed it with all of that. Yeah, I mean, putting it on paper is one of my big things as well. It's not a plan until it's on paper. So yeah, I think, you got to balance out being aggressive, but also hedging your bet that you can change. I think that's one of the trends that people are getting more and more accustomed to. I mean, it's commonplace now for, NBA games to be delayed or canceled or moved to a different date, or whatever sport that you're watching. I mean, the NFL season this year moved games from Sundays to Wednesdays, and they were during the day, and it was weird, but they still got it done. And I think consumers are accustomed to that. So the more that you can, be aware of what's happening, trends. I watched more news than I've ever watched in my entire life, so that I can be up to date on, where are the COVID trends going by geography. That affects my business substantially. Bars getting back opened is a critical. That's 25% of our business, so that's important for us to be able to capitalize on that when bars do open back up to even just 25% capacity. It has a substantial impact on our business. So knowing where that's going, making the plans, but then hedging your bets that if you do need to cancel, that you're not out that entire budget. And then being able to move that either back further into the year or to a different tactic.
That makes perfect sense. I want to be sensitive to the audience and make sure that we are covering any questions that anyone has. So feel free to put those in the chat box. I haven't seen anything, so I'm going to assume we're covering everything you want to know about.
We're very efficient, David.
Is it right? All right, no questions are popping up. So Veronica, did you have anything else that you wanted to cover before we close out? Any final thoughts?
I mean, I think everything was pretty comprehensive. I think that as branders, as marketers, I think we're in very strong positions because we, we're involved in a lot of aspects of a company as in an organization. We're responsible for a lot. We can have a strong handle and hand in what the communication is to our different customers. And I would say take advantage of that. Use that opportunity to open up the conversations with the leadership, with the executives at the company, to leverage and capitalize on the times that we're in to talk about these different things, whether they're comfortable, uncomfortable, or not, and to think about planning for the future. Again, in this industry, we are always having to think about 6 months, a year from now. And I would say just, think even further than that, a couple of years down the line. Where do we want to be? And how are we going to position our companies and organizations now to be able to address what the needs are going to be of our customers a couple of years down the road, not just in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah,
Great.
strong strategy is more important than ever. And I would say for anybody who is, maybe earlier in their career, it's more important than ever to be asking really thought-provoking questions of the team that you work on. I think there's probably a lot of people here who are either currently, in their graduate program or undergrad or early in their career. So I would just highly encourage them to be thinking about the strategy of the company and then asking strong questions of how your daily actions can better align to that strategy.
Great. And Neal, there is a question in the chat box now directed towards you. David is asking, what are some good tips for small breweries just getting started to stand out in the crowd brand-wise?
It's a good question. I think for small breweries, well, in the alcohol beverage space, there's so much innovation happening right now. It's crazy to see how just the beer category has evolved over the last 3 years. I mean, hard seltzers are the big thing, and it's taking amazing amounts of share. So I think small breweries, which are really built on innovation, make sure that you're getting your portfolio strategy right. If you are not focused in really what you want to be as a brewery, and you kind of dabble in a bunch of different styles of product offering, you're probably just going to be known as a brewery that it doesn't have the focus to get to the next level. So if you want to focus on dark beers, then do that really well. If you want to focus on IPAs, then do that really well. But don't get overly distracted with the bright, shiny object of whatever is the hot flavor or style trend of that month.
That sounds like good advice.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think there are no more questions from the group. I think we will wrap it up. I think it's been a very good conversation. We've had everything from beer to DEI. And I think some of the big takeaways are that confidence equals authenticity, and that if you're going to engage in a conversation, do it with confidence and be authentic. Great. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us, and a big special thanks to Veronica Purvis and Neal Stewart. Be sure to visit integrate.wvu.edu for upcoming sessions, recordings of previous episodes, and to subscribe to receive updates. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everybody. Bye.